Good afternoon and welcome to IAB There, our weekly live stream, which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. I'm Angelina Ang, VP of Measurement and Attribution at IAB. And in today's session, which is titled From Data Scavengers to Data Harvesters, we'll be joined by Amal Waishampayan from Full Throttle to discuss the increasing importance of first-party data as marketers become less reliant on third-party data and how marketers can take advantage of their own data to gain data independence and find more customers. Amal is the Chief Product Officer at Full Throttle and has been responsible since its inception for leading the company's vision, technology, platform strategy, product roadmap, data science, and engineering. So let's welcome Amal. Hello there.
Hi, Angelina. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. So let's start with Full Throttle. Can you give us a little background on Full Throttle and where the company sits within the marketplace?
For sure. So Full Throttle, been around for about 5 years. We're an API and SaaS-based first-party data solution company. Had our roots in agency, media, data, and technology from the very beginning. Distribution-wise, we're at over 6,000 different installations on advertiser and brand sites. And we have teams all over the country. Our kind of the clients and the partnerships, the kind of organizations that we work with are varied and diverse. So we work with national brands, we work with media conglomerates like Charter and iHeartMedia, work with ad tech solutions like Blockgraph, work with the retail media giants like Amazon, and we work with a ton of agency partners all across the country, small, medium, large size agencies.
And can you talk a little bit about your role? So it sounds like you've done a lot to help build up the company and its offerings.
Yeah, for sure. I think at the core of all of our technology and solutions is our unique and patent pending ability to generate unique cookieless first party household data. And we do that with our technology that is placed on advertisers' websites.
And what are the specific trends that you're seeing in the marketplace, like especially as it relates to marketing and data?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, as probably many of our viewers and listeners know, first party data is kind of the name of the game. That is the big trend that everyone is talking about today. And I think one of the biggest challenges is really around scale, right? And first party data is so important. There are many advertisers that simply do not have enough of it, right? Now, everyone's a little bit different, but all the way from small to medium sized companies, all the way up to national advertisers and even publishers who've been maybe reliant on not first party data, but reliant on a lot of other technologies in the past. That's really the biggest challenge that we're seeing. That's why our core kind of value prop is, hey, we can help 10x or create more, first party data. And we believe that your website is one of the best places that you can really become a great farmer of first party data versus being a scavenger and trying to find little pieces of first party data here and there from the past.
So you use the word scavenger, and
Yeah.
then I know that as we were talking, you want to shift marketers' mindsets from being a data scavenger to a data harvester. So
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about like what do you see? How do you see? Um, what are the approaches that companies should be looking at in terms of being able to harvest data?
Yeah, I think those that have first party data often have it kind of in the past. That makes sense, right? So
Mhm.
it depends, but like just as a generalization, you may have all of your transactions, people that have purchased a product or service from you in the past, right? Or you may have leads, or someone who has created a shopping cart but never actually bought anything or created an account, and all of that data for the most part is still historical data. And I think one of the biggest trends and demands from the market is that can we have more forward-facing first-party data? And can we figure out how to address the quickly becoming unaddressable category, right? So even if you think about the open web, right? Just visitors on your site that are hand raisers, they're in market for your product or service. Because of the changes in privacy and cookie deprecation, consumers using Safari, Firefox, etc., they're blocking third-party cookies. Users that are on Chrome, and programmatic IO we had last month, and one of the important stats shared there is that 40% of consumers on Chrome are actually disabling, cookie tracking. So using generalizations that only leaves 30 to 40% of your real opportunities is actually addressable. So, the short version of that is that a trend and a demand from advertisers, agencies, demand from media companies too, is that can we, reach the unreachables? Or another way of saying is, can we turn the unaddressable into addressable? And if we can focus on building incremental audiences, helping we help brands and advertisers and agencies extract more audiences from data that typically dies on the vine, especially in browsers like Safari and Firefox.
So let's talk about how companies are harvesting that data, right? One is how do what are some recommendations in terms of making sure that their data is up to date? Are we talking about communicating with these users
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis through surveys, through pop-up windows? What are the best approaches that you recommend or that you're seeing that are most effective?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing certainly is focusing on a value exchange, right? I know it sounds a bit abstract, but are you able to offer something for consumers to give you, first party data? So an example of that on publishers is that everyone's seen you can't view the article till you submit your information, right? You can also there's been a big focus on on-site experiences where you have games and quizzes and personalization opportunities, and it requires you to put your information. Those are active collection. And then where we see our technology essentially we're able to transform anonymously, but transform a lot of that typically cookie based audiences which we can't reach into household based audiences. And we do that through consented. We have a consent and opt-in. We do that through consented data sets that we overlay on top of each other. And we're able to build and transform these audiences into a household currency, and then offer a unique opportunity to brands, their agencies, their media companies to activate with this newly built household currency, which results in incremental first party data for them.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit, right? So there's tons of websites we all visit, and we constantly get that accept all cookies pop-up window.
Yeah.
We've got links to privacy policies. We've got registration forms where you have to check off a box in order to proceed forward. Do you think that consumers are truly educated or aware of the information that they're sharing? And how do we make sure that companies are articulating what that true value is? Because, how do I think one of the things that uh, the trends that we're seeing is that most or people believe that most consumers aren't fully aware, and they're just kind of going through the motions and checking off the boxes or clicking on the buttons. What advice do you have?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's definitely true. I think it's way too complicated. Most consumers are not aware. I would say most marketers are not even sure how all the pipes work, right? So I think it is a very, very complex topic and set of processes that are literally changing, in front of us as the industry evolves. So it is definitely a it can be confusing. I think what's most important, and I think obviously every advertiser does this differently, every publisher does this differently, but how you deploy consent management technologies on your website is super important, right? So, I mean, OneTrust is a tool that has a ton of market share. Everyone's using them. There's several others now that are in the marketplace as well. And that's like our technology, for example, fully compatible with all the consent management technologies. And we think it's really important that brands do as much as they can to articulate what data is being collected, what optionality consumers have in their browsing and personalization and marketing experiences, and then for them to feel like they have the ability to opt out of them. They have the ability to do all the good things from CCPA in terms of understanding sale of data, et cetera. So I think it's important that I think brands provide transparency and a look into what's being done and how it's being done. That being said, are consumers going to go and read everything? Probably not. And we all have phones, we all have updated operating systems on our phones, and every time there's a big terms and conditions, and 99% of folks are not really accepting terms and conditions. I don't think we would realistically expect a majority of consumers to do that. But I think to bring it back, I think what's important is that when brands and publishers in the ecosystem invest in technologies, they think about and they ask good questions about what is being done with this data, right? So making sure that we are the ecosystem is not enabling data brokers, right? Not enabling sale of data, and not enabling those to obtain way too much data on one person, right? Because I think that's where things get I think that's scary, and I think that's what, as if I take off the marketer hat and I put a consumer hat on, I think that's what I'm most worried about, right? As a consumer, I'm biased. I know that there's a value exchange. That, hey, I'm going to get advertising. I want to get the right advertising, but I don't want that to be used to manipulate me in an unfair way, which is a gray box. It's hard to put real control and definition around that. So I think to answer more generally from an industry perspective, I think it's important that all components of our industry think about things in that way. Full throttle, nothing that we do is our data. So that's step number one for us, and that's such a big part of why we're privacy compliant. We're not a third-party data asset company. We're not an identity graph, right? We are actually transforming and creating more first-party data for advertisers. So we always raise our hand and say, this data is for the advertisers. It's for companies that are smaller and maybe a solar company, right? And it's also for companies that are national level, companies like an automotive brand, et cetera. And we always say, this is your data. We want to make you more data independent, which is, I think the underlying goal with first party data is become more data dependent. You have all this data. We launched a product called Audience Flume, which is, basically our brand and open API framework for brands to make sure that they're keeping all of the audiences and data that we are transforming as a service provider on their behalf. So a long answer to your question, but I wanted to answer it from both an industry perspective as well as how we fit within that perspective as well.
Do you see any differences in terms of different generations or different audience segments? Are people who are much younger, the Gen X's, the Gen Z's, less inclined to share their first party data? Or are you seeing that it really varies from advertiser to advertiser or publisher to publisher?
I think what we find as the most significant like directional statistics is actually less generational, and it's actually more about the advertiser and what's in it for the consumer versus a generational mindset. There could also be a generational mindset, but in terms of like a statistically significant a set of data set, I think we're mostly seeing it's really about what's in it for that consumer, whether they're 23 or they're 73. And an example is that if you are in automotive and you are looking for a car, right? You may want to share your location because you're going to get the best offer, the best incentive, the best pricing and the best experience as a result of it, versus another type of site. Maybe it's not as meaningful. Maybe the expected consumer behavior is to say, I don't really want to share my location with that kind of site. Why would they need my location?
Right.
Don't really see it. So typically, I think it all comes down to what's in it for me, right? Which is just bringing it all the way back to value exchange. Like, why should people really, accept terms? Why should they say okay for tracking? If there is a clear indication of what they get in return.
Do you think that, do you see a path forward in terms of a standard approach to how companies will be collecting and harvesting first party data? Are you in hopes of some, and what would that look like from your
Yeah.
point of view?
I think it's definitely different for everyone. I think the transformation service we're providing brands, certainly, we have had a very good success rate with that, and a good retention factor with that. So I would hope in a future state, our service we provide is important and maybe ubiquitous, to a certain extent in the industry. Certainly a biased goal, but I think it's important that brands think about the business process, maybe even more important than technology that is enabling your overall goal. But I'll give you an example of someone who I think does it really well, and that's actually Lululemon. And I think Lululemon does a great job because they collect data, first party data from people who are buying things, people who sign up for contests, great digital experiences. And if you go to something like a yoga class at a Lululemon store, it's not a clipboard with your name. You give your first party data. And when you're doing it, you actually opt in, almost like a OneTrust, but back to analog, of like, hey, here's my information. I'm doing the yoga class. Do I want other things? Yes, marketing, but also it's more clear what else can be done with that data. And I think that is an example of a company that has thought about first party data from all the way to in-store, yoga class, not just, hey, how do I harvest more off my website? How do I harvest more off my digital experiences? Everything is, within this. We need more first party data within our framework to win. They're a great example of someone who does it well.
And as far as so I'm just going through a bunch of scenarios in my head. How are companies, especially marketers, using this data effectively, right?
Yeah.
So they've got the first party data now. Are there things that you're offering in terms of tools or services to help them continue to harness and retain those retain that data to
Yeah.
be to use to
Yeah.
continue to use moving forward
For
in the
sure.
future?
I think one of the biggest, trends that we noticed, and we evolved our offering and product as a result and adapted it because of that. One is that CDPs are such a big part of every brand's conversation today. Almost every brand is either in market for a CDP, kind of half baked, maybe. I think that's probably defines most of them being half baked with some way. There's several that have it and don't know what to do with it either, right? But I think that's been a big part. So we launched our Audience Fluent Open API so that we can allow brands to consume all that data, become data independent. Our API can work with any CDP. So that's one of the biggest things in terms of there's so many stakeholders within brand, like consumer journey, consumer analytics, and understanding how to really have a unified view of the customer. That's one piece. The second piece is that I think traditionally brands and agencies and media companies have had to use traditional onboarding tools like LiveRamp and Newstar and these like big third party data identity companies. And I always jokingly say it's a bit like Cirque du Soleil, right? Like you've got to do so much acrobatics to actually onboard first party data and bring it to a place of activation. And there's so much work involved in that. And then often the loss rate is so high, or another way of saying the match rate is so low that, if you're only left with 30 to 40% of what you started out with, it becomes disincentivizing, right, for
Yep.
consumers to do it. So, what we focused on is what we coined an activation highway. What we do very uniquely is focus on a household currency, right? And that fits for so many different brands and what's important for them. There's some that it may not be most appropriate for. But if we focus on a household currency, we struck and created really unique partnerships with companies like Charter, Comcast, iHeartMedia, Amazon, Simplify, et cetera, where they have also really leaned in on the concept of the immersive household, right? So there's this trend kind of industry movement that we've been seeing called the immersive household. I think there's like a website, immersivehousehold.tech or something. And, I think that's been something that has been moving forward a lot. And we feel, if we can activate that at a 90% match rate, which is what we've achieved in the last 2 years, because of very unique activation highways, then there's something meaningful to it. I always feel like if we solve the problem of scarcity, which I think almost think about like those Mad Max movies where it's like this huge desert and then you have this one mountain, kind of like spewing all the water, and it's like, oh my God, it's a source for first party data. It's great, but it's like, what do you do with it now that you
Yeah.
have it, right? So activation highway, activating at a 90% level was super important. We knew we needed to bring that solution not just to the small advertiser, but also to large national advertisers as well.
Okay, so let's just, in case, there,
Yeah.
people are really wanting to understand what you guys do. We've got CDPs, we have CMPs, we have identity solutions, we got data clean rooms, we got CRM onboarding platforms. Where do you fit in?
So it's super unique. How about this? I'll give you 3 examples of,
All right.
of a use case of someone. If you met someone at a conference and they were like, "Oh, you use Full Throttle? How do you guys use them?" And I'll just walk you through like 3 examples, and I
Okay.
think it'll fit better because we don't really fit in any of those boxes, and it's hard because people are like, where
Right.
where do I pin you?
Where do I pin you?
Yeah,
Exactly.
totally. So, I'll give you a couple examples. The first bucket is around, we have a ton of, we call them like SMB advertisers, right? So local or regional medium-sized advertisers. So you may have like an East Coast solar company at the solar conference sitting across with the West Coast solar company and say, hey, we use Full Throttle. We identify households that have expressed interest by visiting our site, but they're otherwise unreachable, because of cookie deprecation. We can't, they're just unaddressable in most cases. So we use Full Throttle to deploy display, video, mail, like a full integrated, marketing solution, the immersive household, to all these newly identified households. And then Full Throttle actually ingests our transactional data and says, hey, well, how many of them actually signed up, for the solar panels on their house? So that's, one example. Another example is in the bucket of media companies. So you may have like a Charter or a Spectrum, sitting across from someone like a Cox Media and some, elevator, and they say, hey, well, we use Full Throttle. We put it on all of our advertisers' websites, and that helps create net new first party data. That data directly powers our data informed and addressable linear streaming activations, right? That's a big part of what Charter and Stream
Mhm.
offer. And for Spectrum, they'll say, hey, we get to finally close a loop with our solutions because Full Throttle is also ingesting all that transactional data from the clients too. So we get to tell our clients, hey, here's how much video played a role in your actual business incrementality, in your actual sales transaction. So fitting a lot of different buckets there. And then the third one, which is more complex, would be like a national brand, right? So I'll use a national brand. You may have Acme Furniture Company, right? That is sitting across from like a Home Depot, right? And say, hey, we installed Full Throttle on our site. We create real-time, incremental, otherwise unreachable audiences at the household level, right? And then we ingest these audiences, all their activity into our brand new shiny CDP. So we have these amazing, enriched analytics. And then also our agency, a holdco company, brings all these net new audiences into Trade Desk through their like audience platform, right? And then they have a video activation like CTV activation, which everyone tends to focus on, right? So the national brand uses it in a number of different ways. So I think those three are probably the biggest kind of buckets of you
And they're
know,
pretty broad. So and this is fascinating.
yeah,
What's
yeah,
what's the if you had to do in an elevator
yeah,
pitch, right? So, and you got
yeah,
2 minutes as you're going up 30 flights, 30, 30 floors up.
yeah.
What do you say to a prospective potential client?
I would say, Full Throttle uses patent pending technology to help brands, agencies, and media companies. And we do three things because I think three is a magic number. We achieve incrementality by extracting more audience and making them available to you, making them addressable to you from data that typically dies on the vine from your websites today. Number two is that we build data independence. You can wean your business off of big tech and other third party data companies by ingesting and harvesting and consuming all of this first party data for yourself. And number three is that we consummate the customer journey powered by all these web analytics, multi-device journeys, all at the household level.
So you mentioned a lot of keywords there, and it really ties into from a measurement and attribution standpoint.
Yeah.
And and as you've mentioned, we've talked a lot about the deprecation of third-party cookies and identifiers, and now with privacy regulations kind of rolling out in 2023, a lot of marketers and there's a lot of buzz in their industry that it's going to get that much harder, that much more difficult. Um, and can you talk a little bit about your measurement approach in terms of really how are you measuring incrementality?
Yeah.
Are you also using AI and machine learning, and are you helping with like media mix modeling and multi-touch attribution and such?
Yeah, great questions. And the short answer is yes, we're enabling all of those use cases. The biggest thing that we're doing,
But
so
you're not a data clean room.
I think that we could have a whole nother hour topic on what truly is a data clean room, and is everyone a data clean room, and is it
Who
clean or
knows it?
secure? Who knows? But no, I think that's not our primary kind of goal. That's not what we position ourselves as.
Mhm.
That being said, you could achieve measurement in a couple different ways. One is that our technology doesn't use first party cookies, doesn't use third party cookies. It's not using mobile IDs or MAIDs, and we think those are the biggest categories at risk with in terms of what's been traditionally used and what's happening with legislation and changes in the marketplace. But we are transforming into a postal household level, right? We're doing that
Mhm.
privacy compliant, that PII is protected, but we are doing it down to a household level. And because we're doing it at a household level, we can, on the other end of the journey, also ingest transactional data like a clean room, so we can either onboard the data securely and in a, again, anonymous matching way as well, and we're able to then match to a hashed household to hashed household, just getting super specific as how you may be able to do that. Since it's not our data, I think that's kind of the beautiful part about this. We can just, as an advertiser, if you have an engineering team, you can use an API. You can bring all the data into your CDP and actually match one to one, on your own. So we fulfill both use cases only because we know the sophistication of advertisers is a very wide spectrum. But it's really that focus on a household and being able to match that to transactional household sales as well. You could ask, hey, what about companies and they don't have any household type of information with their transactional data? They would be someone who would not be the best fit for the technology. But that there's so many that do have so much information there. And even if you're a CPG brand, you could still be looking at incrementality of sales regionally, or within a certain geographic area, since we still have what households are in market as well.
Well, I'm getting the signal that we're a bit extended over time, and that's because this is such has been such a fascinating conversation. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And I'm sure that our viewers also enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your
Thanks,
time.
Angelina. Yeah, thanks, Angelina. It was great and really great conversation. Really great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Agreed. Same here.